Hello, my name is Alden Taylor and I'm from Avnet Business Solutions. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Avnet's Talos Middleware Automation tool and how it can work with IBM UrbanCode Deploy to automate your middleware deployments. So Talos is an extensible middleware automation intelligence tool that allows you to manage your middleware, deploy applications into it, modify configuration in it, and it is very specific to automating middleware management. It can be coupled with IBM's UrbanCode Deploy, which is an orchestration engine capable of audit trail, compliance, security, process orchestration, and so much more. These two tools fit nicely together to automate your deployment automation across the SDLC. So let's get started. Today I'm going to show you how I can use Talos and the Talos interface to read in a dev configuration, create a template based on certain elements in that configuration. The template will represent an application that I want to move across the SDLC, and I'll move that application from dev into QA. So let's get started. I'm going to read in an existing environment so that I can start managing it. And I'm going to use SOAP to connect to the target system and read information about what the topology looks like. And so you see I put in the username and password to connect to my WebSphere instance, the host name, and the DMGR profile path. Click Save, and Talos is going to connect to that target system using SOAP, read in the topology information, and come back with a report as to what the topology looks like. Now, we're going to read in the configuration, the actual applications, and the other environment settings in the next step. So now we've read in the topology, and here's what the topology looks like. We've got a managed node, we've got a cell, we've got a node agent on that managed node, and a cluster member. This is part of this cluster here, and a deployment manager. I'm going to read in the configuration so that we can create a template based on it. And this step reads in the configuration for the enterprise applications that are installed, as well as the resources that are configured in this environment. So you'll see we're reading in the enterprise app here for PBW and the deployment options that were necessary to install that application, or that were used to install that application. And then we'll do the same for the default application. Now we're going to read in information about the application servers that are out there, the different thread pool settings, the ports, basically all the information under the application server. And then we would go off and start looking at things like server entry ports, variables, and then get into resources. So we're doing resources, we're doing JMS queues, URL providers, all of the elements that we may need to configure this application in another environment. So now we have that configuration, and we're going to now create a template based on that. So I'm looking at the configuration that I just read out of my dev cell 01 environment, and I can select those files that are important to represent this application. I'll give this template a name, and then I know that I'm going to want all of the deployment options that are related to installing my enterprise app into another environment. I also know that mapping modules to servers is an environment-specific value, and so I'll create a variable based on that so that I can set this value to a different value for all of my other environments that I want to push into. Now you can see in this case I'm choosing to import all of the configuration related to that PBW EAR, so all the deployment options that are related to that. But I can also be very prescriptive and select only certain elements. So for example, if I had a particular JDBC data source that I wanted to include, I could include that. if I had certain JMS properties I needed to include. I can pick and choose exactly what I need in order to install this application into all of my other environments. One of the things that I want as part of this application is to be able to control certain elements of the application server when this application is installed. So I'm drilling down into my application server settings, and I'm going to grab the process definition here and set a token on the initial heap size. So I'm going to create a variable here for initial heap size, and I'm going to choose to select that. I want to be able to control the initial heap size in all of my environments. In this case, I am choosing to select only this particular value. So separate from the applications where I grabbed all the attributes, in this case I'm choosing just the initial heap size. So this is just an example of how I can be very, very prescriptive and choose just those elements that I want to change and leave everything else alone when this application is installed, or mirror everything and choose all attributes and make all attributes consistent across the SDLC. I can also change the names of these variables in order to help me later remember what these are. So server is this default name, and that's not as helpful as perhaps giving it a little bit better name. And then the initial heap size. So I've got these values. These were based on the variables that I selected, and I can always go back. I can choose to view where my tokens are, in case I forget what I've tokenized, and different ways to view this information. I can show all files. I can show just those files that I've selected, and I can show just those attributes that I've tokenized on. So I'm ready to save this template, and it's now been saved in the system. I just briefly want to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to look at this template, and when I edit it, you can see what ends up on disk, what ends up being part of this template are just those files that I selected. And everything that I created a variable on has a token now to represent it. So now I want to add another middleware instance so that I can install this template into my QA environment. So I'm going to go through the same process again and read in a different environment using SOAP. Okay, so I've again given the security information to connect to my WebSphere environment, the host name, the profile path, and the SOAP port. So now I'm going to connect out to this QA environment, read in the topology information for that environment, and now I have a picture of what that looks like. So this is actually a lot like my dev cell. You see my dev cell has a cluster member and a cluster. In this case, I do have an additional application server here. So I can quickly, using this tool, view differences between those environments and kind of see what the topologies look like. So now I want to add this template into this cell, and I can do that either from the middleware perspective, where I add a template, and in this way I can see what the which applications or which templates have been installed into which middleware. And I can also see it from the template perspective, so I can see which middleware instances have this template installed in it. From this perspective, I can see the variable values that have been defined, and I can also see that from each of the middleware instance perspectives by toggling the variables. So I'm going to set the initial heap size for my QA environment to 512. And I'm going to set a map modules to servers value to map my my QA cell so that that'll get applied correctly. And if I want to check my work and I want to be able to view what I've got, I can, again, edit this. I can see just those files that are part of the template, see what I've tokenized on. I can also apply a certain version. So I'm going to apply the values from devcell01 to this template, and I'm going to view what that looks like. So you can see that I've got an application server setting that's going to be set. Down here, the initial heap size will be set to 0. And the deployment options for my application are here, where the map modules to server value is set to the value that I gave for dev. I can check my work in QA the same way by applying that and viewing what that looks like. In this case, my JVM arguments are going to be 512 for that initial heap size. So now I'm ready to install the PBW application, this template that I've created, into my QA middleware. And I'm going to use an orchestration engine to do that because it provides me with an audit trail and some security information and the ability to orchestrate a larger deployment process with many different tools. Whereas Talos focuses on the middleware, IBM UrbanCode Deploy can focus on the larger DevOps solution. So in UrbanCode Deploy, I've got some components defined for my application. I've got PBW apps, which defines the enterprise application that I want to install. And in this scenario, it would be built by my build tool, pulled out from source control, and then that build would be available to UrbanCode Deploy to grab out of its source repository. So in this case, I've set this up to use file system basic, but I could use any one of these different source control tools that are supported by UrbanCode Deploy. So my build process could push this EAR file into any one of these tools, and then I could pull that EAR file down when I'm ready to install it into my middleware. So my component process for this is very simple. All that it does is download the artifacts. And again, we're using out-of-the-box UrbanCode Deploy functionality to download the enterprise app out of the source control tool onto the target system so that we can install it. The second component is called PBW configuration, and this component is based on the PBW template that I just built using the Talos interface. So each time I build out a new template, I can import the versions that are related to that. And in this case, I've just built out version 2 of that template, and I can view what that looks like from the UrbanCode Deploy perspective as well. This is the server.json file that contained that JVM argument, and then here is my application deployment properties that are used to install my application. As part of my template, I also have the variable values that were supplied for each of the two middlewares that I'm managing with, that I've applied this template to. So the component process uses a lot of out-of-the-box UrbanCode functionality to orchestrate the process. It starts out with the download artifacts here, where it will pull down the template from UrbanCode's source repository onto the target system so that it can be applied. And this artifact that's being pulled down is the template that we defined using the Talos interface. Next step here is to copy the installation media, and what we're doing is just a standard shell script here to just copy the enterprise app from our application component. Remember, we pulled it out of source control from our build system, and then we copy it over to this component into the appropriate directory. Finally, we use two steps that are provided by Talos as part of an UrbanCode plugin that runs activities in Talos. The first activity that is being run here is apply template, and that's doing the same thing as clicking this button that in the web interface. We are applying the middleware specific values for the middleware that we are installing into with the template and creating a payload that represents the middleware specific values that we want to install into WebSphere. So we apply the template, and then we deploy that payload into the middleware. So this step creates the payload, and then this one pushes that configuration into WebSphere, installing the enterprise application, modifying that JVM arg, etc. Now all of this is based on whatever data is in the template. So if we had put more into the template, deploy would have done more. Because we only have the JVM arg and the deployment options defined in the template, this deploy activity will just make those changes for us. Okay, so let's look at this then from an application perspective. I have an application here called PBW, and I've mapped that application to two environments, DevCell01 and QACell01. And so now I can install into QACell01. And I'm going to, well, let me show you this first. The process for this application has a deploy process here, and the deploy process runs the PBW apps component copy media process, which was copying the application media onto the target system for the enterprise app that we want to install. And then the second step here calls the PBW configuration components deploy process to create the payload from the template, mix in the environment-specific values, and then push those values into WebSphere. All right, so let's get started. We'll deploy the application into our QA environment. I'm going to go with version 2 of my configuration template and the latest version of my enterprise app. So while this is running, let's go over what we've done. We've taken an application from our dev environment and we're pushing it now into our QA environment. We did that by using the Talos web interface to import middleware instances that we wanted to manage, read in the configuration from dev, and created a template based on that configuration. When we created the template, we selected just those files that we wanted to apply into our QA environment, those being, in this example, the deployment options for our enterprise application and the JVM settings that were required, that we wanted to modify in different environments. We created variables based on those values and set values for those variables. In this case, the initial heap size in dev would be 0, but the initial heap size in QA would be set to 512. And then a map modules to servers setting in our deployment options would be different for different environments. We checked our work by applying the template with our middleware instance and viewing what the payload would look like. And then we switched over to UrbanCode Deploy to run through the process of deploying this application into QA. The steps here then were to pull down the enterprise application from our build environment, make it available to us on the target system, and then apply the template with the middleware specific values and this enterprise application, and then deploy that into WebSphere. So the steps here then were, as I've already said, pull down the files from the template, copy the ear file from our build, and then create a payload by mixing the template with the middleware specific values, and then deploying the enterprise application and the configuration settings that were in that template. So now if we come back out to WebSphere, you probably have to log in again. I should be able to show you that the enterprise app is now installed into this environment. And there's our enterprise application installed here, and then also our JVM setting should be applied to our cluster member. So that would be down here under Java Process Management, Process Definition, and Java Virtual Machine. And here we have our initial heap size set to 512. So thanks for watching. I hope that this has been informative, and if you'd like more information about this tool, feel free to reach out to us here at Avnet. There's information in the comments below. Thanks for watching.